Well, hello, everybody. This is Chantill Lopez. I'm going to get the episode number right this time. It's episode 52. I'm excited to be here. We have a lovely conversation just ready for you, continuing our discussion from last episode around women's health and entrepreneurship. That's what we are on board for as a focus this year. We've got an amazing retreat coming up in December in Mexico, all about women's health and entrepreneurship. And of course, I'm here with the beautiful Anne, my favorite red lipstick she's got on. It's so perfect because you're wearing cream-colored jacket and you've got a cream-colored background. So your red lipstick is absolutely perfect. It's like very like old school Hollywood. So
I like that.
Yeah.
Like, well, we got to see something. Otherwise, it's going to just be all beige, right?
I love it. So today we're just going to be drilling down. So each episode we're going to be talking about women's health and entrepreneurship from a different perspective. And if you've been listening to us for any length of time, you'll hear some familiar themes, but they are themes that we believe strongly in. And today we're going to be talking about building safe containers of connection specifically for women and why it's critical for our personal and professional growth. And this is just like what we are all about. And so we're going to share with you some of the frameworks we use and how we do this in all of the different ways, both within our business, the Embodied Business Institute, within our separate suites of offers, and then in our lives too. And we'll see how much we get to because we do like to keep our episodes short and digestible. But hi, Anne. Let's see what's in process, what's in progress. We had a whole, 30-minute conversation already about some of what's juicy and going on. But as always, you go ahead and start us off here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a new location that I am having this first podcast from. And what I have experienced personally, and I would say what's in progress, what's in process, is I was working out of my home since the pandemic. And I still had a Pilates studio, so a brick and mortar location at the time. And it was lovely and it was great. And I loved working out of my home because I had a beautiful, well, first off, I had finally received a room that was sort of available in my home. And so this was a very big deal because until then it was like working on the couch or the kitchen table and so at this point I was able to sort of claim this office that I was desiring, because I think for me, having a sense of space to think is a very regulating experience for me. And another thing I would just add on to that, because our point of view is women's health and entrepreneurship, is one of the biggest challenges for me as an entrepreneur and as a woman, and then becoming a mother, was losing those long stretches of time to really lose myself in my work. Mm-hmm. And I yes, that can be a bad thing, but it can also be a really good thing. And to never have that access. And so having the office was like a way for me to do that in my home. And then a few weeks ago, I've had a great friend who has an office space for rent. And there were some other women in the building whose children go to school with my children. And I said, you know what? I think it's time. And I really was unsure when I was like renting it. I was like, why am I doing this? I've got such a beautiful window. Everything's here. But oh my goodness, I show up early and I sometimes leave late. Like I'm trying to just absorb just being in here and just having the space. I've got my walls covered with my large calendars because I love to think spatially. So it was, and what's funny is, although I desired it, I had a lot of resistance and fear stepping into it. Mm-hmm. And what shifted for me with the sense of the nervous system work is I was able to share with my friend that I was a little nervous about, renting the space. And it was really sweet, like her text responses to me and how supportive she was, and just And I think in the past I would have held that in, which I think would have dysregulated me more. And so all of these little steps have just been, and now I'm like happy as a clam. So,
Yeah.
It was like such a great move, a good next step. And so I'm thankful for that.
Yeah. Awesome. I love it. Yeah. I can see how good it is and how energized you are by it. It's excellent. Yeah. I don't have anything like particularly deep and profound. I think one fun thing is that my daughter just started playing the bass guitar, and we just got her this really rad. We have a friend who gave us a 3/4 bass, right? Because she's little and basses are massive, so you got to get a small one, which are not easy to find. So we had a friend who gifted it to us with a bass amp, and we had a beautiful road trip on Monday to go get it. And she's just she's already like just the epitome of a rock star. She's so excited about it. And my partner, Max, is here this week, and he's a musician, and, he's teaching her things. And he restrung my acoustic guitar. So it's just been sweet. And my son has an electric guitar. He has a Mexican Strat, which he doesn't really play much, but there might just be like a little thing happening here where we're all, gonna kind of stretch ourselves to, put our hands on instruments. It's not something I have really ever done. I mean, I have noodled around with this acoustic guitar, but I have no talent, no acumen, nothing. So for me, it's like a real stretch. But both of my kids have been musically inclined. And yeah, so that's just a fun, light thing that's happening over here. Lots of other really good things. I think one reason why this topic of creating, safe containers of connection for women is on my mind is not only because this is our focus for the year, but Anne, you shared something the other day. You were leading our embodied course creation call, and you just were so lit up by how the women, and we happen to just have this container as all women. It's not meant to be, but that's often what happens because we usually work with people who are in the health and wellness realm, which is, I think, largely women. But just, watching them thrive and grow and make connections and feel validated. And then I was leading our NSIF, our nervous system facilitator training group the other day. And they actually, because we communicate via something called Voxer, which is like a WhatsApp. It's an, thing where we can stay connected between calls. And they were just really one of our beautiful members of the cohort. She was with her mom as her stepdad was dying recently, and she was sharing about this on Voxer, which is incredibly vulnerable, and just the support and the camaraderie. And one of our other members was like, I really just feel so honored to be like finally I'm stepping into this bonding that's happening. And this is what we see. They're in level 2. They're like, there's a sense of like, they've kind of come through some hard stuff in terms of the learning and the building of skill. And they're really seeing each other. And I think starting to love each other. And it's so powerful. So, that's just been like on my mind, how important the work is that we do beyond our like content expertise, our skill expertise in terms of curriculum design and pricing and, building businesses and the nervous system work. Just to see, I think I feel really proud of how we have built the containers in which we do our work. And we want to talk about that because we do it in some different ways. We do lean into different frameworks, but they all have some similarities. But before we get into that, anything that you just want to share to kick us off, Anne, about creating these kinds of containers? I know you were sharing a little bit with me earlier.
Sure, absolutely. So what's fun, as for those of you who's maybe followed along the evolution with Chantill and I, is we're both very creative and rather prolific, but we also really enjoy working together. And so we have worked towards designing some separate streams that we're sort of, each of us are spearheading. And so I'm spearheading a suite of offers called Profit for Wellbeing, which is really looking more at, how can you build a business for yourself that really prioritizes profit and your owner's pay, because that is something that I think many entrepreneurs, that's not always top of mind, particularly with entrepreneurs we work with. And so one of the things that's been really interesting is I've started a small group within this, and I get, you gather people together. If you're someone who is a leader and you're bringing a group together, and you're like, okay, so how am I going to? These two people don't know each other at all, which is quite cool, because I'm in this group, the people don't know each other, because sometimes they do, and then it's easier, right? But when people really don't know each other and you're talking about things like money and how much your business is making, there has to be a huge sense of safety that comes from that. And so it's just been really fun for me to start something new and then say, although the context is very, very different, to lean on and have this deep well of knowledge of how to lead these containers so that people do feel psychologically safe. And that will segue right into what we can share, which is really this framework that has very organically emerged and that Chantill and I have been leaning more and more on to lead containers for people, whether it's live in person, whether it's online, because we live in a hybrid world, right? So yeah, I'm excited to dig into that.
Yeah. So one of the things that has been on my mind lately, and it comes up a lot, is like, what is safety? What does it mean? What does the lack of safety mean? And of course, there's a lot of talk about this, particularly as the polyvagal theory gains, kind of a foothold and interest, and people are, it's not new. We've been talking about psychological safety for a while. But now we're talking, more and more of us are talking about it from the physiological perspective, right? From the polyvagal perspective. And one of the things is we are training people, to go out in the world and facilitate nervous system regulation and behavior change. It's like, well, what is the language we use? And can we create a common language? And are we even aware of what makes us feel safe? And we might be aware of certain thoughts or behavior patterns or even embodied experiences, right? Felt sense body experiences like heart racing or clammy hands or shortness of breath or these kinds of things that normally we would describe as like, stress responses. It's like, well, what is our body telling us, right? What is it telling us about our safety? And why would I be feeling unsafe? Maybe intellectually, we're like, well, there's no reason I should be feeling this way. Do I have butterflies in my stomach? Why am I holding my breath? Why am I sitting back? Why am I feeling tension in my body? Why am I having, agitated thoughts? And so it is just such a primary concept, right? I think for me to try, and you were just commenting in our earlier conversation, Anne, about like how naturally this is happening in your own work and facilitation is like, well, what is the language we use? How do we normalize it? And how do we just invite people to be curious about when they are feeling safe or unsafe and to go just start to be thinking in that way? And before we get into sharing the containers that we are using or the frameworks we're using, I wanted to read this quote because it's this was the jumping off point for Anne and I. I shared this quote online, I think last week, but this is by Stephen Porges, Dr. Stephen Porges, the creator of the polyvagal theory. And he writes, "There's a brutal irony to the fact that many of the features of our built world that are billed as keeping us safe also make us feel unsafe. If one wanted to take a cynical point of view, one might posit that at times this is an intended outcome, and that certain individuals or institutions may want us to feel unsafe for their own selfish ends. But why would anybody actively want to make us feel unsafe? The polyvagal theory offers a simple explanation. When we feel unsafe, our bodies shut down our ability to critically think or learn in favor of a need for immediate survival." And I mean, this is just like, it's so obvious in a way, right? It's like,
yeah, right.
And Anne, you were talking about, as women for a long time, our environments and social structures and economic structures have been created intentionally to keep us in a place of a lack of power, and then what may have been intentional is now unintentional and yet very socially acceptable. And so like, this is just part of, and it's not just for women, it's like any group of people who is marginalized, this is like what it's ubiquitous, right? It's insidious in a way. And it's like, well, no wonder there are so many ways in which if you are a marginalized part of a marginalized population that you don't feel safe And so I think for us, we take a stand as women to say, well, how can we intentionally, deliberately, consistently create containers of safety so that, because also we mentioned this in the last episode, we have unique nervous systems, us women. And so we're impacted differently by our physiology and our responses to our environment, and we really want to like raise up that awareness and be creating containers that support us in feeling safe. And I think the last thing I would just say is for me, when I'm thinking about the frameworks that we use, it's not just about creating frameworks in the moment that optimize our brain or make us feel safe so that we can learn and connect and socially engage. It's about empowering really anybody, but we work mostly with women to embody that experience so they have more power over what happens outside of the containers that they're in with us. That feels really important to me. So, of course, I want to do the best I can do to support people who are working with us and with me and with Anne. But then I want them to take that experience and those skills and be able to replicate them for themselves, in their personal lives or in other professional containers that they're in.
Absolutely. Because I think, as someone who valued, strategy and intellect and frameworks and teaching people things, like you can teach somebody all day long, but if you're not tuning into the fact that for whatever reason, that framework that you're sharing with them or that mind map that you've created or that system you're going to work through them with. I'm thinking of like if you're a consultant or something, if that does not feel safe to them, that's where you'll see the resistance come up.
Yeah.
And again, it's probably all unconscious.
Right.
They're not meaning to be resistant or, but because they don't even maybe have the language around like, oh, that doesn't feel safe. And if I transfer this concept to the concept of chronic pain and this thought of like it's a biopsychosocial model and where one day so my experience with working with people in pain and just my own self experiencing persistent pain on and off is like this sense of like one day something feels safe and although it felt safe last week it doesn't feel safe today, right?
Yeah.
And so getting curious about that, getting aware of that, and so you can transfer that concept to something you're teaching somebody about or supporting them in growing or developing their business. There's a lot of lack of safety around the sense of money and around the sense of profit or just building a business or marketing and being seen. Like it's everywhere. And it's just such a powerful framework, I think, to help you improve your work. And so when I was meeting with someone today, I was just constantly leaning in. And what's funny is into this polyvagal framework or this nervous system work framework, but when you're leaning in, you're actually sort of leaning out because you're asking questions and you're allowing the person to share what makes them feel safe or unsafe about the work that you do. And I just think you're able to get a lot more buy-in because they can, that was my experience today.
Yeah.
Is because I wasn't just like, oh, this works so well. It's so exciting. It's going to work. It's like, no. Yeah.
Yeah. That's such a beautiful point. And I'm trying to think of, I think what it comes down to for me, there's two things that I'm thinking of is like, oftentimes if you are a coach, a teacher, a leader, a manager, you're the authority, right? And somebody has come to you contracted for support.
Mm-hmm.
It's so tempting to be like, to like force your agenda, right? Because just out of like excitement, because you do know it works, or
you're genuinely excited, right?
And then to be judgmental if the person is experiencing resistance and taking it personally, and then like doubling your efforts to convince the person or to fix the problem. And I think when you understand that creating, building these containers of connection where others feel safe, it is really about like you're holding so much of your own steady space that you're not taking it personally. You're willing to just be with the unfolding of the person in front of you, whether it's a new client, a new student, or somebody you've been working with for a while. And you can just be curious about like, oh, there's the resistance. Like, that's so interesting. Because as we were talking about earlier, like a lot of times they're saying they're not resistant. So they believe that they're not. And yet everything, the tone of voice, their body language, the action they're taking is very clearly pointing in the direction of they're not safe. They are resistant. Resistance is an expression of defensiveness, a defensive or nervous system on the defense, right? In protection mode. And when you can just, I mean, it's just, isn't it feel so light and so empowering to just be like, oh, this is not personal. And it's also not personal to them in a way. You know, it's like,
Right.
oh,
Yes.
their physiology is just like these autonomic patterns that are just rolling them, you know, along. It's like, oh, and then secondly, to your point of like, oh, I can just stay curious. I can ask questions. I can invite them to take the conversation in a direction that feels safe and you know, in the brain-based work that you and I do, it's like, oh, how can I put the, like, I can see the person moving into an away state, right? Prefrontal cortex shrinking, defensiveness rising. It's like, and I mean, when I say defensiveness, I don't mean expressing, although it does, right? Express. I don't mean like being defensive. I mean, the nervous system is in a defensive state, an activated state. You can, this is like the most beautiful way to roll with the resistance is to just keep inviting this curiosity. And I find that that helps me to really anchor into a steadiness so that the other person can become deactivated, right? And then it's like, oh, now this is just a win-win for both of us. And then I can, if I'm listening well, I can guide them toward what is clearly making them, or what I am observing is making them feel safe. And we both get more out of it.
Yeah. I love everything. I love how you take what I say and then, you know, offer a reflection on it. And it just helps me experience it even better. But I think too, what I like so much about it, because I was very curious about this open-ended questions and leading through questions. But what I like is, and I think with women, because we do have to run on our intuition, and because if we aren't safe, we're tuned into that a little bit more than maybe if you can walk around the planet and never not feel safe because you're big enough that it's just never an issue that you might not be safe, right? So I think women, because of that physical difference, may sometimes be a little bit more attuned to that. And for me, although I studied a lot of the questions and the leadership strategies, because it never went back to the biology, it didn't excite me as much. And so I just think for me, the fact that it goes back to the body, it goes back to science and biology, it just, because you can intellectually understand something, but when you intellectually understand something and then pair that with feeling, it's so much more powerful because we are embodied brains, right? We're not just one or the other.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. One of the things that Chantill and I have done is we, a lot of times in the background when we're running any sort of program, is we have an outline of how we're going to lead. And so we want to share that outline with you today. And it's really come from a way of creating containers where people can develop strong relationships, because we know with business, especially small business, or even if you're trying to build big teams and lead, developing trust is huge, and getting buy-in from your community is really important. And so one of the ways that we like to start is starting with sharing wins. And sometimes that language doesn't work with everybody. So sometimes we'll also can say, well, how did you grow this week? Another way that we do that is, what is a gratitude you have this week? Although a lot of times we'll also put gratitude at the end, but I don't want to get too ahead of myself. But those are just some examples, because it allows them to tune into themselves and to become, a lot of times in the nervous system work, we call it joy-seeking behavior. So for me, it's training people to become like win-seeking behavior, or win reflection, or growth reflection behavior, so that when you come together in the container, the client and the people you're leading are remembering the positive things that they have achieved that week. And a lot of times we'll couch it as, personal or professional. So, because, sometimes, especially if you're in the season of your life of caretaking, you can't always get that professional win because something in your caretaking life has wheeled its head.
Yeah.
and you've had a personal, like, hey, not getting sick from the flu if your whole family was sick from the flu and you didn't get sick. Knock on wood, I don't. So,
yeah. And we can, I think in later episodes, we'll dive into this, but, recognizing, like, being observant, like, we recognize that sometimes asking somebody to share a win was actually making them feel unsafe, particularly because a lot of women have a very difficult time acknowledging, myself included, how I'm doing well, right? My brain is so focused on how can I do better? What am I not doing? What else is there to do? So this is just like a very poignant, I think, example where we have to be careful that we don't assume that this will make everybody feel safe and being very flexible. So that's why I was saying, like, well, what is a growth? What's a gratitude? And it doesn't have to be professional or on topic. It can be anything. Like, I've been riding my bicycle a lot. Like that's a big win. That's like, so just as an example. And then just quickly as we wrap up, and again, I think we'll continue to explore this, really normalizing all the ways in which we feel safe and unsafe and helping people to build language around that. So, we're talking about that. We're inviting sharing around that. We're sharing with our cohorts and our groups, these kinds of ways of perceiving safety and lack of safety, including felt sense, right? Because this is difficult for people, is to like really connect with the felt sense experience of safety or lack of safety. Recently, Anne brought in a tool called the feelings wheel to help open up people's language around how they're feeling. Because, if you've ever read Atlas of the Heart by Brene Brown, she talks about there's like 6 feelings we say that we're experiencing all the time, and that's about it. We don't have like a very expansive language library around expressing how we feel. So, and prioritizing the embodied experience of safety. Like, we really cook this into the way we talk to our clients and our students, and we invite them to explore their own language, what feels unique to them. We usually do nervous system work, together to kind of stabilize the container, to allow people to land, to allow people not to necessarily rush into feeling pressured to do big thinking or big sharing, because oftentimes, like Anne and I, we're rolling off a big call, or we're like, in a problem solving mode, and it can be difficult to transition. So I think honoring transition time is one of the things that we do. And then, we've got a couple of other things here. Anything you want to highlight before we close today, Anne?
Yes, I would think so. After we practice nervous system work, and we do that in a way where people, aren't necessarily performing in front of each other. We really sometimes we invite people to turn, so that it's very, do your own thing and you can feel that. And then the next thing is then, people are there to learn from us. And so then at that point, we do get into the topic at hand. Yeah. And we focus not just on us talking to them, but also them communicating with each other. And we do that very strategically. So that's another way in which we do that. And then again, we usually will then end with a gratitude if that wasn't brought up in the beginning.
Yeah, or a takeaway, or like, how am I going to put this into action, right? So it can be very supportive. A lot of, our clients are primarily looking for accountability just beyond the skill that they're